Unit 731. They called it a lumber mill. It was a slaughterhouse. In 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army built a compound outside Harbin in occupied Manchuria. On paper, it was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. The prisoners inside were called maruta, logs. That wasn't slang. That was policy. The scientists were trained to stop thinking of their subjects as human. The man who built it was Shiro Ishii, a military physician with a medical degree from Kyoto Imperial University and an obsession with biological warfare. Ishii had toured Europe and noticed something that excited him. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 had banned biological weapons. His logic was simple. If the world agreed to ban them, they must be extraordinarily effective. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians, but also Koreans, Russians, and captured Allied soldiers, were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and smallpox, through food, through water, through fleas bred in laboratories. Scientists watched through observation windows as the infections progressed. They took notes. They timed organ failure. When the disease had run its course, the prisoners were dissected, alive, without anesthesia. Ishii insisted on it. Anesthesia would distort the results. Surgeons removed organs one by one from conscious men, women, and children to study real-time effects of infection on living tissue. But disease was only part of it. Prisoners were locked in pressure chambers until their eyes burst. They were frozen, thawed, and frozen again. Limbs were amputated and reattached to opposite sides of the body. Blood was drained and replaced with horse blood. An estimated 3,000 to 12,000 people were killed inside Unit 731. Not a single one survived. When Japan surrendered, Ishii destroyed the compound and executed every surviving prisoner. Then something worse happened. The United States found out. And instead of prosecuting Ishii, they made a deal. In exchange for his research data, Ishii and every scientist who worked under him received full immunity. No trials, no prison. The Soviets wanted the data too. America got there first. Shiro Ishii lived as a free man in Tokyo. He died in 1959 at 67, at home, in his bed, surrounded by his family. Not a single member of Unit 731 was ever prosecuted. MKUltra. The CIA wanted to control the human mind. They destroyed hundreds of them trying. In 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles authorized a program called MKUltra. The stated goal was to counteract Soviet brainwashing. The actual goal was to find a way to reliably control human behavior, to erase memories, to implant false ones, to create assassins who wouldn't remember pulling the trigger. The man in charge was Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist who raised goats on a Virginia farm and spent his weekdays dosing human beings with psychoactive drugs without their consent. He ran 149 sub-projects across 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons. The funding was laundered through front organizations. The centerpiece was LSD. Prisoners were given it for 77 consecutive days. Psychiatric patients received massive doses during therapy sessions they never agreed to. The CIA set up safe houses, hired sex workers to lure men inside, slipped LSD into their drinks, and watched through one-way mirrors. The program was called Operation Midnight Climax. No one was ever told what happened to them. In Montreal, Dr. Ewan Cameron ran a sub-program at McGill University called Psychic Driving. He drugged patients into weeks-long comas and played looped audio messages through speakers under their pillows for months. The goal was to erase personalities and rebuild them from scratch. It didn't work. Patients who checked in for mild anxiety emerged unable to recognize their children. Some lost years of memory. Some had to be retaught how to use a toilet. Then there was Frank Olson, A CIA biochemist, Olson was secretly dosed with LSD by Gottlieb during a work retreat. He spiraled into paranoia. 9 days later, he went through a closed window on the 13th floor of a New York hotel. The CIA called it suicide. When his body was exhumed decades later, forensic investigators found a cranial injury consistent with a blow to the head before the fall. No charges were ever filed. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Most were. The ones that survived did so by accident, misfiled in a financial records building. How many people were tested? How many were permanently damaged? How many died will never be known. Sidney Gottlieb retired to his goat farm and died in 1999 at 80. He never faced a single charge. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. They told 399 men they were being treated. For 40 years, they were being watched die. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service launched a study in Macon County, Alabama, one of the poorest black communities in America. They recruited 600 men. 399 already had syphilis. None were told what the study was about. They were told they were being treated for bad blood. They were offered free meals, free exams, and free burial insurance. They were never treated. That was the point. Even when penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, the researchers withheld it. They actively prevented participants from receiving treatment elsewhere. When some men were drafted into World War II and would have been treated by military doctors, the Public Health Service intervened and got them exempted. They wanted to see what syphilis did over a full lifetime. So they watched. Men going blind, losing motor control, developing brain damage. Passing the disease to wives and children. For 40 years, the study continued. Results were published openly in medical journals. No one objected. In 1966, a Public Health Service employee named Peter Buxton filed a formal objection. Dismissed. He filed again. Dismissed. In 1972, he went to the press. The AP broke the story. The study was terminated the next day. By then, at least 28 men had died directly of syphilis. 100 more from complications. 40 wives infected. 19 children born with congenital syphilis. A $10 million settlement followed. In 1997, President Clinton issued a formal apology. But the damage went far beyond those 600 men. It shattered trust between black communities and the American medical system for generations. Researchers traced that mistrust directly back to Tuskegee. The experiment ended in 1972. The wound never healed. Walter Freeman and the ice pick lobotomy. He promised to cure madness with a hammer and a 10-minute procedure. He left a trail of hollowed-out minds across America. Walter Freeman wasn't a surgeon. He had no surgical training. But between 1946 and 1967, he performed nearly 3,500 lobotomies using a tool modeled after a household ice pick. The technique was simple. The patient was knocked unconscious with electroshock. Freeman positioned the ice pick above the eye socket, hammered it through the thin bone into the brain, and wiggled it to sever frontal lobe connections. Then the other eye. 10 minutes. No sterile technique. He performed lobotomies in his office, in hotel rooms, and in the back of his van, which he called the lobotomobile, as he drove across the country giving demonstrations. He lobotomized housewives with depression, veterans with PTSD, alcoholics, and children as young as 4. Howard Dully was 12 when his stepmother brought him in because she found him difficult. Freeman drove the ice pick through both eye sockets. Howard spent years in institutions and didn't learn the details of what was done to him until he was 56. The most famous victim was Rosemary Kennedy. In 1941, at 23, she underwent a lobotomy arranged by her father. During the procedure, the surgeons asked Rosemary to sing while they cut. They kept cutting until she went silent. She spent the remaining 63 years of her life in an institution, unable to speak coherently or walk unassisted. Freeman's definition of success was revealing. If a patient was quieter, more obedient, cured. If they sat in a chair and stared at a wall for the rest of their lives, that was still an improvement in his view. He performed his last lobotomy in 1967. The patient died of a brain hemorrhage. It was her third lobotomy, all by Freeman. He was finally banned from medicine. He died of cancer in 1972, still believing he had helped people. Behind him, roughly a third of his 3,500 patients were left severely disabled, and hundreds died from the procedure itself. The Aversion Project. South Africa's military tried to cure soldiers of being gay. They used electricity, chemicals, and surgery. Between 1971 and 1989, the South African Defense Force ran a secret program to cure homosexual soldiers during apartheid. It was led by Dr. Aubrey Levin at Ward 22 of one military hospital in Pretoria. Many subjects were teenagers, 16 and 17-year-old conscripts forced into military service. The first phase was aversion therapy. Electrodes were attached to patients. They were shown photographs of men. Electric shocks were administered. Voltage was increased until the subject screamed or passed out. Then photographs of women. No shocks. The process repeated for hours, days, weeks. Men equal pain. Women equal safety. When aversion failed, and it always failed, Levin escalated. Chemical castration drugs. Hormonal treatments that cause breast growth and emotional breakdowns. And for those deemed most resistant, the final option, forced sex reassignment surgery. Not because they were transgender, but because the military decided if it couldn't make them stop wanting men, it would make them women. The procedures were botched. Patients were left with mutilated bodies and permanent nerve damage. An estimated 900 soldiers were subjected to the program. When apartheid ended, the Aversion Project surfaced during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But Aubrey Levin was never prosecuted. He immigrated to Canada, got a medical license, and became a clinical professor at the University of Calgary. In 2010, a hidden camera captured Levin sexually assaulting a male patient. He was convicted in 2013 and sentenced to 5 years. Not for what he did to hundreds of soldiers in South Africa, but for what he did to one patient in Calgary. The crimes of Ward 22 never produced a single conviction. The Monster Study. They didn't break bones. They broke children's voices. In 1939, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa designed an experiment to test whether stuttering was caused by negative reinforcement. That children stutter because adults tell them they're stuttering. To prove it, he needed to make healthy children believe something was wrong with them. He chose 22 orphans from the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans Home. Children with no advocates. He divided them into groups. The key experiment: 6 children who spoke perfectly normally were subjected to relentless negative feedback. Graduate student Mary Tudor told them their speech was flawed. She told them they were beginning to stutter. She corrected every slight hesitation. She made them hyper-aware of every syllable. It worked. The children became anxious, withdrawn, refused to speak in class. Some developed speech problems that lasted the rest of their lives. Not because anything was wrong with them, but because a researcher said there was. Johnson never published the study. His colleagues called it the Monster Study. He went on to become one of the most respected speech pathologists in American history. The orphans got nothing. In 2001, the San Jose Mercury News uncovered the study. Reporters tracked down survivors in their 70s and 80s. One woman described a lifetime of shame about her voice. Another said she'd avoided speaking in public for 60 years. They had no idea they'd been part of an experiment. They just thought something was wrong with them. In 2007, 6 survivors were awarded $925,000, roughly $150,000 each, for a lifetime of manufactured self-doubt. Wendell Johnson had died in 1965, decades before the truth came out. He never answered for the monster study. The children he used as test subjects spent their whole lives answering for it instead.